The silence in the house was deafening as David sat in his living room, the weight of his words still hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. At 55, he thought he understood his family dynamics perfectly, but the past few weeks had shattered that illusion and left him questioning everything he thought he knew about love, expectations, and what it meant to support his children. David and his wife Margaret had raised 3 children who couldn't be more different if they tried. Brett, their 27-year-old son, was steady and predictable. Amy, 25, had always been their people-pleaser, the daughter who colored inside the lines and never caused a fuss. But Lynn, 24-year-old Lynn, had been their hurricane from the moment she could walk. Lynn was the child who got her college degree at 16, who packed her bags and moved to Louisiana at 18 with nothing but determination and a fierce independence that both impressed and terrified her parents. She was brilliant, argumentative, and unapologetically herself. Her body was a canvas of tattoos and piercings, her hair always some shocking shade of blue or purple, her life a beautiful chaos that David secretly admired even when it gave him migraines. When Lynn announced her engagement to Brad, a 27-year-old who matched her unconventional energy perfectly, David felt a mix of pride and relief. Brad had protected Lynn through difficult times, stood by her side when life got messy, and loved her exactly as she was. David genuinely liked the kid, tattoos, piercings, and all. Margaret's reaction to the engagement was pure maternal joy mixed with years of pent-up wedding fantasies. She immediately launched into discussions about venues, flowers, and dress shopping, her eyes bright with excitement about finally planning the wedding she'd dreamed of since her daughters were little girls. But Lynn and Brad had been crystal clear from the beginning. They didn't want a traditional wedding. They wanted something small, intimate, authentic to who they were, a celebration with family and close friends, nothing fancy or elaborate. It was exactly what David would have expected from his most non-traditional child, but Margaret couldn't accept it. The pressure began immediately. Margaret pushed and prodded, dropping hints about venue locations, showing Lynn magazine photos of elaborate ceremonies, and making comments about how special a real wedding would be. David watched his daughter's face grow tighter with each conversation, saw the frustration building behind her eyes. But Margaret was relentless in her pursuit of the perfect wedding that existed only in her imagination. Lynn finally caved to her mother's pressure, reluctantly agreeing to plan a traditional wedding despite every fiber of her being screaming against it. David knew it was a mistake the moment he saw Lynn's defeated expression, but he hoped maybe they could find a compromise that would make everyone happy. The compromise lasted exactly 1 week. A single argument about floral arrangements, Margaret insisting on traditional white roses while Lynn wanted something more unique, became the breaking point that sent Lynn fleeing back to Louisiana like a wounded animal seeking sanctuary. The phone call that followed was devastating. Lynn's voice was shaking with emotion as she announced that she and Brad had eloped. They would have their small, intimate celebration in New Orleans around Halloween, exactly as they'd originally wanted. It would be their way, on their terms, without the pressure and expectations that had been suffocating them. Margaret's reaction was nuclear. The screaming match that erupted over the phone was so intense that David could hear both sides of the conversation from 3 rooms away. Words were said that couldn't be taken back, wounds were opened that might never fully heal, and when the call finally ended, both women were sobbing. For weeks afterward, Margaret cried daily. She mourned the wedding that never was, the mother-daughter bonding experience she'd been denied, the special day she'd been planning in her mind since Lynn was born. Every conversation became a litany of what she'd missed, how Lynn had robbed her of this experience, how selfish her daughter was for not considering her feelings. David watched his wife's grief with growing frustration and a gnawing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with their perspective. Lynn hadn't wanted a wedding in the first place, she'd been clear about that from day one. She was their least traditional child, a practicing witch who worked as a nurse and did hair on the side, someone who had never conformed to conventional expectations in any aspect of her life. Why would her wedding be any different? The breaking point came during yet another tearful conversation about missed opportunities. Margaret was sobbing about her little girl's special day when David finally snapped, his patience exhausted and his protective instincts for Lynn overriding his desire to keep the peace. Why are you surprised? He exploded, his voice carrying years of suppressed frustration. Lynn didn't want a wedding in the first place. She's our least traditional child. I'm just glad we at least got the engagement announcement. Stop crying about it and wait till Brett or Amy get married because they are the ones that will actually enjoy that wedding shit. The words hung in the air like a slap. Margaret's face went through a series of emotions, shock, hurt, anger, betrayal, before she launched into her own verbal assault, calling him names that made their 28 years of marriage feel fragile and uncertain. Now David sat alone, wondering if he'd been right to defend his daughter's choices or if he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He loved Lynn for exactly who she was, fierce, independent, unapologetically authentic, but he also loved Margaret and hated seeing her in pain. What do you think David should do? Was he right to defend Lynn's choices, or should he apologize to his wife? How would you handle this impossible family situation? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below.